Hey guys, what's going on, and welcome back to another video. And if you saw my recent videos for the latest Harry Potter movie that I've covered, as well as Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, then you know that at the tail end of 2023, I took a break from covering some of the older series that I was in the middle of covering in order to catch up on some of the 2023 releases that I had yet to check out, or some of the newer ones coming out. I wanted to get as many under my belt as I possibly could as we were leading into the 2023 kind of wrapping up. So here we are today, continuing on with the Land Before Time series with my buddy Mike of Did You See That? So let's get into this. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. And in today's video, we're finally talking about the second to last movie in the Land Before Time series. There are 14 movies in this franchise. It has taken us a little over a year to slowly make our way through this franchise. And today we're finally talking about the 13th installment, The Land Before Time 13, The Wisdom of Friends. This time around directed by Jamie Mitchell, with Charles Grosvenor switching from director to supervising director. This film stars people like Cody Ahrens, Logan Ahrens, Anthony Skillman, Jeff Bennett, Andy McAfee, Rob Paulsen, Sandra Oh, Cuba Gooding Jr., and many more. And before we get too far into this, I'd like to say a big thanks to my guest who has joined me in all of these videos, and that is Mike of Did You See That? As usual, anytime I have a guest in one of my videos, you guys can find the link to their channel down below in the description box, so definitely go give them some love and let them know I sent you. And yeah, this is a franchise that has been a just roller coaster ride. If you've been following along with these videos, you know that I have a nostalgic place in my heart for that original Land Before Time series. Mike went into these having not seen a single film ever in his life, and he, just like me, loved that first film. It's a great film of its time. It's got charm, it's got so many big names attached to it, and it's just one of those iconic films that I grew up with from that era of hand-drawn animation before we get into the big era of 3D animation. But like a lot of popular franchises at that time, and maybe a little bit more so than a lot of them, this franchise would spawn off a bunch of straight-to-video sequels. And it's been a mixed bag. Some of them have been enjoyable, fun times to watch. Some that I thought, oh, you know, that was pretty cute and they did some cool things narratively. And some of them have been a little bit lackluster, and some have been just downright terrible. And so here we are now talking about the 13th installment, the second to last film in the franchise. And I should also add on, I mentioned in my last The Land Before Time video that I also recently learned about the fact that there was a 20-something episode series of this that actually went on as well, a little animated cartoon series with about 20-minute episodes. I do intend on buying that DVD set to watch those, though Mike will not be joining me for the review for that one. I don't know when I'll be doing that, but I do plan on some point covering that portion of The Land Before Time as well. So here now with the 13th installment, we start off, and one of the most notable things that kind of stood out to me is that Littlefoot's voice was sounding different over the course of the film. Now, we've had segments where different actors have come in. There's been times where an actor played Littlefoot one time, maybe two times. There was even a phase in the earlier part of the franchise where Littlefoot was played by the same individual for multiple installments. But in this film, I noticed that his voice kept changing, and after my fiance looked on IMDb, we learned that there were 3 different voices for the character of Littlefoot, who were played by Cody Ahrens, Logan Ahrens, and Anthony Skillman, which was very clear to me now why that was the case, that I kept noticing that his voice was changing over the course of the film. Sometimes he sounded more like the Littlefoot of previous films, sometimes he sounded more like a little girl, then there was times where he just sounded like a completely different little kid altogether, and it definitely added a layer of inconsistency to this movie. But that's not what this movie is about, so let's get into what this movie is actually about. In the very start of the film, Littlefoot is just joking off. He's playing on top of this log that's over a big fall, and his grandma's telling him, hey, listen, you shouldn't be on there, get off of there. Of course, that log starts to get a little bit rickety and it's about to fall. His grandma comes, saves Littlefoot from there, but she is on that log now, ends up falling, but catches herself, and thankfully does not get hurt, does not die or anything like that, but that just puts a whole lot of guilt onto Littlefoot himself. He's struggling with the fact that he almost got his grandma killed or hurt, and so she teaches him about these things called the wisdoms. And the wisdoms are just another word for the to-dos, the rules. We learn throughout the course of the film that other friends of Littlefoot, like Cera and Ducky and Petrie and Spike, they all have their own versions that their parents say to them, and pretty much they're just rules to live by, things to do to keep yourself safe and keep other people safe. And so it's kind of funny to me that after all of these films that Littlefoot is put his grandma into danger, even though he's put himself and others into dangers countless times, and nobody has ever brought up the wisdoms to him. So once he learns about the wisdoms, which are essentially, like I said, just rules, he starts to kind of want to implement these into life a lot more. He wants to implement them into the things that he's doing with his friends, and he wants to teach other people about the wisdoms, rules to keep themselves safe, things that they need to do, sticking together, keeping your head on a swivel, protecting those around you, different things like that. Essentially just the traditional rules we all learn when we're kids. Don't touch that burning thing, get away from that animal that might hurt you, don't leave the house without telling anybody that you're going to go somewhere, don't leave alone, that kind of thing. Just the classic different rules that we all learn as we're a kid. And again, I think it's just kind of funny that Littlefoot has gone through so many huge adventures where they have left their family and been put in dangerous situations and almost died in 12 other movies, and they're just now talking about these wisdoms. So Littlefoot becomes a little bit obsessed with the idea of these wisdoms. He ends up taking them to his friends, which they all end up telling him, hey, listen, we have our own to-dos, we have our own rules, we have our own say-sos because our parents say so. And that ends up leading into one of the many musical numbers that's in here. I almost always forget that these films are musicals after the first one because a lot of them really stink. There's been a couple of installments that have had some catchy tunes, even ironically some songs that my fiance and I, weeks or months later, will sing to each other just because of how goofy they are, but a little bit catchy. Unfortunately, here with the 13th film, this is on the weaker side when it comes to the musical numbers, with most of them just being incredibly stupid to listen to and cringy, and never really grabbing me or making me want to sing these songs later on. Not too long into this film, as Littlefoot's trying to teach his friends about his wisdoms, about these rules, they end up meeting these three individuals known as Yellow Bellies, which I thought was a funny name to give these dinosaur that seem a little bit clueless, a little bit lost, very energetic, very excitable, but maybe not like the smartest necessarily in the world. And they end up learning that they're trying to get to somewhere called Berry Valley, somewhere that has tons of berries, and that's where the rest of their herd was actually trying to go, but they got separated from their herd. And because they're a little bit ditzy, Littlefoot takes it upon himself to want to try to teach them the wisdoms and help them get to Berry Valley to reunite with the rest of the Yellow Bellies. And one of the things that is absolutely shocking about this are the two voice actors who play the parents in this situation. These Yellow Bellies are known as Lufa, Doofa, and Fubi, with Lufa and Doofa being the mom and dad, and they're played by Sandra Oh and Cuba Gooding Jr. And now we've had a couple of names that have surprised me in this franchise, like Kiefer Sutherland played Littlefoot's dad in one of the films. But yeah, to be this far into this straight-to-video series that, wasn't really popular around this time. 2007, I was in middle school. I had already kind of aged out from the Land Before Time series. So to know that this was coming out when I was in middle school, I had never even heard about this film. I don't even know that there was kids really watching this around that time, which is probably why we're, nearing the end of this franchise in terms of movies. But to know that even this far into the careers of people like Sandra Oh and Cuba Gooding Jr., that they were able to get them to sign on to this movie was crazy. But honestly, with all of that said, the premise now, and we got some big names in the mix. I was not a fan of this film. I honestly found it to be probably one of the worst sequels to The Land Before Time. And we're going to get into why after we hear from my buddy Mike from Did You See That? So let's go ahead and throw it on over to Mike, and then we'll get back to my thoughts on why this movie is easily one of the weakest in the entire series.
For today's collaboration, we're taking it back to 2007, and this is The Land Before Time, The Wisdom of Friends. Thank you, Avni, for having me on for the 13th installment in the Land Before Time series. And this series has definitely been a big mixed bag of the original being great, some of the sequels being okay, and some of them being absolutely terrible. But where does The Wisdom of Friends stand? This is an interesting one because I think, firstly, kind of the big positive for me and the big kind of message of this movie overall about the wisdom and kind of how you can impart that on others and then how others can then impart that on others. And it's kind of like a chain, right? It just kind of gets passed down to passed down and passed down, right? I think that's a very important message to take away from this movie, but also the fact that we have some kind of stakes to an extent, as this involves Littlefoot's grandma who nearly falls off a cliff. Luckily, she does survive, but he's kind of haunted by that, per se. And in a way, because he's haunted by that, it kind of gave me a little bit of a reminder in a way, to an extent, of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which I know Anthony just recently checked out. In terms of, being like, a big shock happens in your life and it gets you kind of to reevaluate things in your own life, and also kind of how that impacts you. I mean, in this case, it's Littlefoot as a creature, of course, but in real life as a person. So I really like that element of the wisdom of friends. I think that there's some good messages here. As always with these Land Before Time movies, there's always some good message, but I also like the fact that they made it a bit more personal, including Littlefoot's family, especially his grandma, pretty much right at the beginning of this movie. However, another cool kind of addition we've got to the cast here is like Cuba Gooding Jr. and Sandra Oh, who do some voice work here. And I thought that they did some pretty good voice work for kind of the material that they're given. But it's so cool to see that 13 installments in, we've got some pretty big known actors and actresses doing voice work. I think that is pretty unique in this Land Before Time entry. However, besides kind of that, we get introduced to like 3 new characters here. Lufa, Doofa, and the other one, I can't remember the other one, I apologise. And, they're okay. I mean, the thing is, like with Doofa, it's just, yeah, they're not really fantastic, unfortunately, and the premise in this one is kind of focused on those 3 characters, and they're kind of heard as such, trying to get back to like the Berry Valley. And I think there's elements where the story's okay, there's certain moments that's alright, but ultimately, I wasn't huge on those 3 characters, especially Doofa, and it ultimately made me not really care about this installment. The music, again, not fantastic, unfortunately. I really wish it was, because that would have been absolutely tremendous, but it's not, as in kind of like every other installment. I haven't got too much to say on this one. Thank you for having me, Anthony, for this 13th installment. Really, really appreciate it. We've got one more to go after this, and then we're done. But for now, back over to you, my man.
A big thanks to Mike for joining me yet again for the 13th installment here of The Land Before Time. One more movie, my friend, and I appreciate you sticking by me for this entire thing. When I asked Mike to join me for these movies over a year ago now, I'm so grateful that he was willing to say yes, because now looking back at how many movies we've covered, how long it's taken us over the course of time, it's insane to me that I got somebody to sign on to doing 14 movies with me, but I'm so grateful that it was Mike. It's been a lot of fun to cover these movies with you, and I kind of feel similar to Mike, where I don't have an abundance to say on a lot of these movies at this point, because so many of them are so samey. There's usually something that the kids end up getting themselves mixed into that they shouldn't have, and now the parents are wondering where they are. The kids find some way to save the day in the end. They come back to the Great Valley, the parents say, "Good job," or "Bad job," and then they learn some sort of lesson, and then they move on. I do think, like all the other films, this film has some nice lessons about trusting in others, as well as, sticking by certain rules, even though they're breaking all the rules in order to take these yellow bellies to the rest of their herd. They're breaking all the rules the parents have told them. But yeah, what I can really say about this film is, unfortunately, I just found it to be a chore to get through. A lot of these films, as I said, are filled with pretty basic premises, but a lot of times they're fun to watch. They're cute, they're charming, and I enjoy the time spent with these characters. But man, were these yellow belly characters that were introduced in this film just so annoying. I found myself really struggling with this movie, not because I was bored and trying to fall asleep or anything like that, just simply because I was so irritated with the characters that we're following. And this film, more so than the other ones, just felt so generic, felt so bland, felt so cookie cutter, felt like we've been there and done that. And unfortunately, even though you have people like Sandra Oh and Cuba Gooding Jr., their characters are so frustratingly stupid at times and so silly and so goofy. I mean, their names are literally Lufa and Doofa, that it just lends itself to, unfortunately, feeling like they could have cast anybody in those roles. And knowing that it's Cuba Gooding Jr. and Sandra Oh doing those roles, it's just crazy to me. It almost feels like they had like a deal to pay to somebody, like they were doing a favor for a friend or something like that. And while a lot of these films, like I said, have not been incredible, Charles Grosvenor, who becomes a supervising director in this one, had directed a big chunk of the films, majority of the films in this franchise. And you can definitely tell that the director was different in this one. There was just something about the way that the story was told that just did not latch onto me. I was not a fan of Jamie Mitchell's direction in this film. And mind you, again, these are movies for kids. These are movies that are not made for somebody like me. But I've enjoyed a lot of installments in this franchise, or at least had more to say. But in the case of this film, there's nothing more than the fact that Littlefoot takes some friends to some location. He tries to teach them some rules about life along the way. And that's really it. Now, one notable thing about this is that while you do see Grandpa, the long neck, Littlefoot's grandpa, throughout the course of the film, he never speaks. The only one of his grandparents that actually speaks throughout the course of this film is his grandmother. And that is because Kenneth Mars, unfortunately, ended up passing away just a few years later in 2011, and instead, around this time, had chosen to voice Grandpa in the TV show that I mentioned earlier that had 20-something episodes, and Kenneth Mars did not return for this film or the last film in the franchise, which is kind of heartbreaking. He did end up passing away near the ending of this franchise, and I'm sure his last few years of life, he just probably didn't have it in him to keep voicing these characters. But yeah, he played Grandpa, who was the main grandparent that spoke and ever, did anything with Littlefoot in all these films, in every other installment in this franchise, except for this one and the next one. So, as much as I don't love everything about this franchise, I do really appreciate Kenneth Mars playing Grandpa in all these films. I've always enjoyed his voice in things like The Little Mermaid as well. And so to know that I would not hear him in this film, as well as that I'm not going to be hearing him in the 14th film, is a little heartbreaking. However, when I do go and visit that series that has 20-something episodes, I will look forward to hearing Kenneth Mars as Grandpa in that series once again. But yeah, you just notice throughout the course of this movie that a lot of the parents don't really seem all that involved. A lot of them aren't even really all that voiced or have a lot to say. You have John Ingle in here again, not only as the narrator that starts off the movie and ends the movie, but also as Sarah's dad. Topsy, that's what his name that we learned, but he doesn't really ever have any lines of dialogue in this movie, nor does Sarah's new stepmom. A lot of the parents just feel like they're kind of there, with Grandma being the only one that ever has anything to say, and she's usually the one that has the least to say in previous installments, and all the other parents are there at the end. They just never say anything. And so there was just something about this film that just felt a little bit off to me. There was something about this film that just felt strange, and a lot of times it just felt a little bit backwards to me. As I mentioned before, these characters have gone through so much already, and for Littlefoot to just be so stuck to the idea of rules, even though he's been given rules in the past, they just haven't been titled wisdoms, just felt a little bit weird to me. This feels like a film that should have come out way earlier in the franchise versus being the second to last in the franchise. And again, even though you have Cuba Gooding Jr. and Sandra Oh in these, two lead roles in the film, or two of the main roles in the film, it just felt like a paycheck kind of thing for them, and the characters are so annoyingly written that I honestly could not have cared less about the Yellow Bellies and them getting to Berry Valley. I just could not have, and I'm so glad that this movie is already under my belt, and I probably will never watch this Land Before Time movie ever again. So a big thanks to all of you guys for watching. A big thanks to Mike from Did You See That for joining me here for another video. You guys, as usual, can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. We have one more film in this franchise, and if you've been enjoying the Land Before Time series we've been doing here on the channel, I appreciate all of you guys for tuning in. And so yeah, just look forward to the 14th and final installment into the Land Before Time series of videos coming very soon. And somewhere in the coming months, I will plan on checking out that TV show and doing a full series wrap up here on the channel as well. A big thanks to you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.